Okay, 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, University of Florida Geography Department. Welcome to the first colloquium of the fall of 2020. We're doing this, as you well know, synchronously and virtual, which means we will go from the usual time and everybody's scattered all over the world. The silver lining is that this format gives us an opportunity to hear more outsiders, people like geographers who are in alternative career tracks, including at least one alumni, I hope, biologists working in geography departments or on geographical questions, and other people not in the local area. I think I've lined up a pretty good group of people to give us talks, including the new PhD students who are required to, and so on and so forth. Please note that this session is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. If you have any objections to your image or your voice being heard like that, please just turn off your microphone and stop your video. You can still watch and still get the benefit of it. Before we get started, I want to remind the students taking this class for credit or taking it in anticipation of credit during a different term to fill out the enhanced speaker evaluation form and upload it to the Canvas assignments page when the colloquium is over with. You'll have a day or two to do that. Faculty and other students can complete only the first page, but if you take the time to answer the other questions in the enhanced form, it'll be excellent feedback for the speaker. As our speaker today is a PhD student presenting her required colloquium talk, it'll help her refine the talk so that she can use it when she goes on the road looking for jobs. Whoa, that was a noise. Okay, so anyway, today's speaker is Aline Carrara, born in Brazil, grew up in Iraq. That must be an interesting story. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations in Brazil and a Master of Science in Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She entered our program in 2016. Her advisor is Dr. Bob Walker. Her research interests are political ecology, land use, indigenous territories, Amazonia, human-nature interactions, policy, and environmental governance. She's published in journals like Tropical Conservation Science and plans to graduate this fall. So this is the last time she'll have a chance for this. Now, she did give us one title, but she's changed the title. The title of this here is the Taming the Waraju, the quest for Ahua's territoriality. And Alina, if you would take it away and teach us how to pronounce the territoriality, we'd appreciate it. So it's all yours. You should be able to share your screen.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Dr. Beamford. Welcome, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Okay, so thanks for being here. Taming the Warazu. The Warazu means, in the Awa's language, the white man. So the Awa is an indigenous group from the Brazilian Amazon, occupying part of the Brazilian savanna. And that's how they self-identify as Awa. However, colonizers have historically called them the Xavante. So I'll be using those two terms interchangeably, just so I don't sound repetitive. But the Awa people, okay. And so I'll give you an outline. So indigenous territories and territoriality are the core foundational aspects that I want to look at. And in this sense, I take territory as a concept that is a result and a production of territorialization, or human beings organizing, mobilizing politically, socially, economically around a space. And territoriality, the process that comprises all these characteristics of specific societies, specific land use, what is that, a combination of forces that produces territory. And so my focus is in the Brazilian Amazon. And as we can see here in the map, we have around 400 indigenous territories. And here in more specific, I'll explain to you what indigenous territories stand for, because there's a legal connotation on it, which goes beyond the conceptualization per se. So this region is home for around 173 ethnic groups, which comprises around 500,000 people. So almost 50 non-contacted groups and covering around over 20% of the Amazon region. So here in this red dot, I don't know why. I think someone is sharing here. So in this red dot, apologize, technical issues. I first encountered indigenous population in the Amazon on my early childhood. And I remember my grandpa calling indigenous people as Juruna everywhere. This is like Tocantins state by the Araguaia River, close to Ilha de Bananal, and everybody was Juruna, irrespectively of their age, their gender, their anywhere. Like, so young boy was a Juruna, young girl was a Juruna. So every indigenous people, he would call it Juruna. I never got that, what that meant. Nowadays, I call it like the white savior complex. But that's how I first encountered these people. And so it was later in 1988, with the return of democracy in Brazil, that the new federal constitution was rewritten. And indigenous people were protagonists in mobilizing sources and alliances with international organizations, environmental internet organizations. And they included the first indigenous chapter in the Brazilian Constitution. And in this chapter, there is a clear legal framework ensuring and granting these people rights over the lands they traditionally occupy. And then the state becomes responsible for demarcating and protecting their land. So it was in this context that I found out who Juruna was. So Juruna actually meant this guy here, Mário Juruna. He was the first indigenous person to occupy the National Congress in the Chamber of Deputies. And he is a Naue. He's from the Aue ethnic group. And he actually has been advocating and fighting for, he was since the 70s for land rights. He died in 2002, but he was always like a fighter for indigenous land rights. He actually managed to demarcate his the land where he was born in 1975. And so looking at demarcation, what does that entail? So under the Federal Constitution of '88, we have 7 administrative steps to form what I call here indigenous territory. So indigenous people, they start claiming their land, the portion of land, the space they occupy as indigenous territory. So the National Indian Foundation, which is a government agency called FUNAI, we call it FUNAI, the acronym, and so it's responsible to conduct a deep assessment to identify that land with that people. So ethno-development research, land use, environmental assessment. So it's a robust set of information that produces a technical report. So this technical report is then published. Step 3 is contestation, and then contestation is a period of time where non-indigenous people can contest that technical report. If any contestation is done, the Ministry of Justice is responsible to mediate this conflict together with FUNAI. If no contestation happens, then FUNAI is responsible to publish a public declaration recognizing these areas. And so after this declaration, the physical demarcation of the area is done by FUNAI also. And then with physical demarcation, the Brazilian president must sign a decree homologating this land, recognizing this land, this space as indigenous territories, and publishing at the official Federal Official Gazette. And once that is done, registration under the Secretary of Union's Patrimony. So this is the administrative process according to the law for official recognition of indigenous territories. However, this law was promulgated around 30 years ago. There is still a lot of struggle over land rights, and indigenous populations in Brazil, they've been advocating for what we call demarcation for a long time, and they are claiming. In fact, those headlines are constantly all around, people calling attention to the ensuring the land rights, but also calling attention to these people's needs. And so in this context, I take territory as my foundational unit to look at and understanding process and that composes territory. So in the Brazilian Amazon, territory is an artifact of contention. And then I want to understand how the Aue people territorialize their indigenous territories and how this is unfolding at the present time. How do they express themselves culturally in space? How they territorialize their land? And what happens after an indigenous territory is demarcated? And so I came up with a set of questions. So what are the practices and relationships that a specific Aue community situated within an IT are utilizing to achieve their territorial aspirations? How these practices address this process of regional deterritorialization? And if we take the IT as an artifact of state-driven land management and territorial ordering, do this entity address the community's territorial aspirations? And if not, then how these people are filling the gaps within their territorial needs? So in order to conduct this research, I relied basically on three main foundational theories. So spatial theory, indigenous geography, and political ecology. So space, place, and theory and territory, in order to understand the Aue's relationship with their space, the place, in order to understand how they create territory. So I took Mass's concepts on space as open systems and place as social relations, and also territory as political action and resistance from Agnew. In terms of indigenous geography, I used the refugee studies literature and theory in order to address displacement and mobility of the Aue people. And political ecology allowed me to look at the Aue placemaking through territorialization processes. So then I used the locality approach and added a feminist political ecology to understand agency, intersectionality, and forms of resistance. And indigeneity was a very important literature also, adding in terms to the occupation of space. So the Aue people have been studied quite a lot. There are a lot of and a very robust set of content about these people. I met them, so I've been interacting with these people for around since 2001. So almost 20 years. And here, there's a lot of ethnographic work, a lot of anthropological productions and cultural assessments and understanding of their cosmologies and cosmogonies. There's very little in terms of territoriality and this territorialization in the making. And so that's why, that's where my research contributes to the literature. So I'll give you more background why these people are so many publications about them. So they identify themselves as Aue Uptabi. They are part, which means real people, by the way. And they're part of this linguistic group Macro-J, and they have nomadic roots. Zomor is a very important concept for the Aue people. It's basically the act of walking. So through walks, knowledge is passed through generations, hunting and gathering happened, mapping out territories and settling and moving and understanding the space through walks has always been a practice for these people. And so we don't quite understand clearly the extent of these walks, but according to the Awe's oral history, they once lived close to the sea. They came from a place close to the ocean, according to the histories they tell, and they pass through generations. Which is in fact interesting because recently there are a few genome mapping, tracing through DNA studies. They were published in Science and Nature, and actually their genetic data, the Awe, in this case here we're using the colonizer word, Xavante, as I said in the beginning, use genetic data and show a strongly affinity to Australasians. So we don't quite know how they got here, but those are two possible origins for them to get into Brazil. Later, ethnographer Kurt Nimuendaju published a map locating these populations in the Brazilian savanna between 1788 and 1844. Literature indicates that around 1860s, they were located in the southern savanna portion. And then they crossed the Araguaia River, fleeing from gold miners and initial colonizers. And so they occupied an area on eastern Mato Grosso state that comprised around 5 million hectares, a huge area. And so Garfield explored this walking, the Zomori practices in depth. And he came up with this representation of the migrations of the Awe people. So they land in this motherland, Sorepre, in the middle, and from there they occupied huge swaths of land. So Serra do Roncador is a very sacred place for the Awe people. There's this movie that, if you want to know more about it, Lost City of Z, it's pretty interesting. But here we have an idea of how they occupied this region. And for the sake of this presentation, I'll be talking a lot about these two indigenous territories that are Xavante indigenous territories. So Marauatsede and São Marcos. So mind these words, Marauatsede and São Marcos. So now, after they sat here, they were living their lives, doing their Zomori, until during the 30s, dictatorship Vargas came up with this March to the West plan in order to colonize the Amazon region and to integrate the Amazon region to the rest of the national territory. And there were many expeditions during the implementation of the March to the West. And around 16 years later, it was the first Pacific encounter between the Awe and the colonizer. In fact, during the 16 years, a lot of expeditions happened trying to contact these indigenous populations, and none of them succeeded or survived to tell much. So missionaries were killed by the Awe, colonizers were killed by the Awe, expeditionaries were killed by the Awe, and so only 16 years later, there was a Pacific encounter. And here we can see one of the sertanistas, Francisco Meirelles, and Apoe, a very prominent Xavante leader. And this encounter was enough for the Brazilian government to promote a big national propaganda on, we have conquered the Western Brazil. And so the Vargas, the dictator Vargas, flew into Mato Grosso, flew into this Western Brazil. It was actually the very first Brazilian president to set foot in this region. And here again, we can see Apoe receiving President Vargas. And that huge national propaganda portrayed the colonization of this wild woods. And incorporating, bringing the indigenes to the wider society, the Brazilian society. And so in order to do that, the government aligned with Catholic missions to prepare and train these indigenes to be Brazilian citizens, to learn the colonial language, so in that case, Portuguese, to practice Catholic rituals, they work as labor force for fields to promote agriculture in order to integrate the Amazon economically. And so we can see that there's a drastic change in their population, right? So they lost more than, more than 1/3 of their population during this process of colonization. And so in the 60s, the military coup came, in a process which in my research, the broader research I'm calling as national developmentalism phase. And with that, a robust apparatus to develop the Amazon was put in place. So hydropower, highways and roads, large-scale agriculture, which led to land speculation. And with land speculation, Xavante, that indigenous territories, the Xavante territory, was the last one that nobody has ever set foot in. And then due to land speculation, the land where Xavante was located was sold to an elite group who later became one of the largest landowners in Latin America. And so the Xavante happened as the last frontier. Was like the Xavante were savage, they're the wild Indians, they're ferocious. Nobody aimed at contacting these people. And so what happened was that one morning after the conclusion of the Waya, the Waya is a very sacred and important ritual for the Awe. It's a ritual that progress manhood towards spiritual knowledge and power. And this ritual occurs, it happens around every 15 years, more or less. And so they were concluding this very important ritual one morning doing sunset, and out of a sudden, the Air Force airplanes flew into Xavante, start burning their houses, kidnapping kids, killing the elder. And then as a result, they airlifted 300 people from Xavante into a Catholic mission. And so it was the end of Xavante that became fields for soy and cattle ranching. So this was the last frontier. Those are the last contacted Awe people. And this is already by the 70s almost. It was more precisely in 66. And so by the 70s, all Awe indigenous territories were subjected to regularization process, and they were all demarcated into islands according to the location of the Catholic missions. So this is how it looks like, and it still looks like that. So we have around 9 indigenous territory located in the western portion of Mato Grosso state. And from this whole portion of land, now they occupy around 1 million hectares in total, comprise a population of around 13,000 people. So I mean, all the indigenous territories, there are a lot of indigenes living in the urban places as well. And so they were here. They were brought here in São Marcos, which is one of the first Catholic missions. So São Marcos is home for around 67 villages. And one of these villages is where I conducted my field work. And that's some of the results I'll present are a result of this interaction. So the Danime Pari has a very interesting history, because there are around 500 people living in this village, and 20% of them were brought, they were inside those airplanes. So their story tells that they were subjugated to the Warazu, and in this sense, other Xavante, other indigenous, other Awe, who were already in the missions like for 10, 12 years, they were actually marginalizing these newcomers as well. So Danime Pari was a scape and a form of resisting to that subjugation. And so they fled from the mission, the center part of the mission inside the territory, and came to isolate themselves from the group autonomously. And so I'll talk a little bit about the methods that I used. So together with school teachers, we design and implement the Awe da Hoi Manawe workshop. So Awe da Hoi Manawe literally means Awe's well-being or living well. So in order to develop and implement, I use the DIRI method. So among the decolonizing methodologies, the DIRI is one that stands for deep listening and very few interruptions. So basically deep listening in terms of generating underpins of a whole broad of context. So during the workshops, we relied on focus groups that were kind of self-led according to their intersectionalities, community mapping, storytelling, oral history. I also conducted surveys at the household level, and territorial engagement was done through commuting to the nearby city through open-ended interviews. So all these methods were combined together, and they offered a very interesting insight, which I'll be presenting right now, some of the findings. So some of my main findings concern to Awe territoriality, their cultural spaces, and their perception of the territorial world. So the village itself, as we can see in this image, has a lot of routes coming out of it, right? We can see Zomori here clearly. They're still walking, they're still, there are some clear routes. And the way they perceive the world is that it's formed in a concentric manner. So the village entails all the spaces, kinship, relationship amongst its members, the environment, and the outside world. So the totality of this concentric spatial organization is the idea of Ro. So I'll be talking about that very soon. Is their territorial world, which extends past the boundaries of the village and past the boundaries of the IT. So the creation of the world, the myth of the Paraninaya, between the interaction between the light world and the dark world, forming what we have here in this representation, the crops, the water, which I'll be talking about, the village, and the Ro. And so this is a diagram that places these important concepts, which I'll be talking in the next slide, which specializes culturally the manifestations of Xavante occupation within territory. So the Ro, the territorial world, the Ri is the house, the household, the Ho is a traditional school. Then in the center we have the Wara, and the Wara is a decision-making process. I'll be talking about it. The village is formed in a Yuxo relocal manner, which means the houses belong to the women, and the men move into, after marriage, the men move into the wife's house and live there with the wife's family. And all the brothers from this household must leave at some point according to their own marriages. And so there are two moietes, so Oawe and Porezaono, one facing sunset, the other one facing sunrise. And they're always located, and this is a typical Awe village, they're always located facing a body of water. And I'll be talking about the quintais, which means backyards, but I'll be talking about them very soon. So here's another more real understanding of how that looks like. We can see Zomori routes coming out from pretty much all around. So Oawe means big water, and Porezaono, the other moiety, means tadpole. And they are complementary, oppositionally complementing themselves. So the Wara is the most central unit of the village. It's not a material place. It's materialized by relationships and gatherings that men, it's a very strictly male environment, gather twice a day between before sunrise and before sunset in order to discuss all relevant issues concerning to the village level. All the decision-making process in terms of the village level occurs in the Wara. Another very strictly male place is the Ho, as I said in the previous slides. The Ho is the traditional school. This is very important for the Yahweh because this is a sort of legitimation of their village as an autonomous village. So a village that has the Ho and don't have to send their Wapte, which are the young men who attends this traditional school, to another village is recognized as an autonomous because they are able to form their own leaders. And so the Wapte are young boy, they're sent into this house and they remain between 4 and 6 years with no contact with the rest of the village. They only receive visits from their mentors and from their mothers who bring them food once a day. And I didn't have many access to this very male environment because I'm a woman. So that's what I have to tell you about the Ho. And so another very important unit, it's the Ri. So as I said, the Ri is the house, the household. So this is how it looks like. The Ri is very interesting. It emerges as a very feminine space. Much as the Wara and the Ho are masculine ones, the Ri, all the decision-making process that is done in the Wara publicly conversations between the men are actually a relational foundation of these conversations are related to the Ri. As my data showed, the Ri stands up as the foundational unit structure for the whole village. It symbolizes a locus of political function, and all the actions and decisions made at the household level affect the collective unit. And so in this sense, the woman's voice are seminal within and beyond the village. So feminine dominance is present in both structure and decision. So they dominate cultural, social, physical reproduction. And that brings a very important and a very strong gender role into spatializing the places where they live. And the houses always belong to the older woman. And the Riks emerges as the most intimate spatial unit of belonging for the Yahweh. Another interesting space is the quintais, which are literally the backyards. So when they came, they were brought from Marawatsede into the São Marcos missionary space, village. They couldn't practice their rituals. Their relationships completely changed. They were seen as savage, as animals, as primitives. And it was, they start occupying the backyards. They start occupying the backyards in order to do and continue perpetuating what they believe was important in terms of their cultural practices without being seen by the Catholic priests and nuns and all the Warazu people. So they start populating the backyards. The backyards is also a very strictly feminine space as well. Kids, there are a lot of kids running around. Hunting happens, gathering happenings, crops, small crops as well. And so before we move into the Ro, I am going to talk a bit about these three important spaces that are not always spaces, that are not always places. They were brought by the Warazu. So the church, the Catholic Church is there. And it was a clear, according to my data, it was a clear act of territorializing, because it was like, we don't want to be with these priests. We want to be on our own and doing our own thing. Can we have your blessings? And then here's the church. The school and the health agency are very interesting because according to FUNAI and to the demarcation process for recognizing indigenous territories, one aspect of an autonomous village is a public school and a small health agency, which promotes or offers up to tertiary services and also triage for moving them to local hospitals. And achieving this was a very intense political articulation, mobilization by the leaders in order to bring this school that runs for elementary and secondary school with municipal and state funding, and also the health agency. So also a very interesting process is that both these agencies, they bring income, they bring salaries, they bring jobs into the village, they bring training. And so it was a clear form of conquering or achieving territorial sovereignty and territorializing. So with that, let's move into the raw. So the raw, as I said, their territorial world in a concentric manner, that whole notion. So let's say that according to the history that we have registration that there were in the Brazilian territory. We know a little of the parts of their Zomori, their territorial occupation, but we now focus on this specific region. And here we can see the reserve, the Indigenous Territory São Marcos, and we can see the Danimipari village. And this is a commute that we did a lot. So every day they're going to the city, every day they're going to, at least one person from one household is going into the city of Barra do Garças, which is located around 200 kilometers from the village. And from these 200 kilometers, 80 are unpaved road within the territory. So it's not like a very quick trip, but they do it like a lot. And then being with them and commuting with them and hanging out with them in the city of Barra do Garças, I could map out their presence in the urban space. I could understand what are kind of needs they had and what they were like doing in the city. And that was very interesting to understand how they encounter modernity and how they appropriate and continue taming the Warazu in order to achieve what they need in terms of territorial sovereignty. And so I understood there was a very deep process of selection. So in a lot of places, they're not welcome. In a lot of places, they're actually forbidden to come. Mainly, they were seeking for public agencies. So FUNAI, the federal police, the public hospital, they occupy the squares and they rely on the city a lot for food as well. And so understanding these spaces and understand how they indigenize the urban space, I can see a clear aspect of territorialization that goes beyond the village and beyond the indigenous territory per se in order to meet their needs. In fact, they go beyond the urban place when they see, so that picture that I showed you before, like the president coming into the region, for them, that was a sign of like my chief talking to your chief. And so this is the federal capital here in the map. And we can, sorry. And Brasilia, then the federal capital, became a very important hub for them to mobilize politically in order to meet their land rights and territorial needs. They've been performing and like their performances in front of the National Congress. I myself, you can see the image here. I have myself gone to Brasilia with them and understanding what they were doing there, what kind of meetings they're having, what kind of people they were meeting. And it was always associated with health and education. And so we can see clear tools of the Warazu in terms of utilizing these tools to continue their cultural resilience process through territorialization. So I'll come with a few conclusions right now. And then I'm just gonna kind of wrap it up with indigenous territories and territorialization of the Awe and walk you through some final thoughts. So a very intense presence of different intersectionalities in many different spaces and many different places of Awe territorialization. Race was a clear one in the urban space. So the racial cut, the prejudice, the how that led to different spatializations and cultural manifestations of these people within the urban space. Gender, very strong role of gender, and tying to the literature, age also are just crucial elements for our territorialities. So according to Agnew, territorialization is an act of resistance and cultural resilience, and this for me is a clear example of that. Their spatiality is informed by dynamic process of relationships, which means all the relations are actually producing different ways of occupying space. And this process continues despite all the efforts of governmentality through the interactions with government and deterritorialization forces. And so in this way, when we look at the IT, the indigenous territory as an artifact of land ordering from the state, this is how these people are seen. They're seen as a dot in the map. This is the indigenous territory they occupy. However, we've seen that they have a much broader concept of zomori and territorializing space. So they themselves do not think about territory as the IT. In fact, this specific village, the people think that this institutional recognition was really important, adding protection to their territory, but they are very, very cautious about the state and on believing that the state would honor this pact. So they're always with one foot back. And their conversations about land is all about, them and us, a clear presence of othering there. And here, in my research, I call it the production of multi-territorialities, because they are producing multiple forms of territorialization in multiple scales, and the intersectionalities add many, many layers, and there are many other subtle aspects of this space occupying. So some final considerations. ITs, they happen within legal frameworks. They're based on spatial concepts. However, they're frequently opposed to the concepts that result from the community process. And this is very different. Like I said in the beginning, this Amazon region is home for around over 170 ethnic groups. Different structures, different political structures, different customary laws, different relationship to land. And so the IT kind of puts everybody in a box. It does serve as an important reference for political organization, and it does address some anxieties in terms of indigenous people. It grants them constitutional visibility and legal protection. However, just some of these aspirations. So indigenous land remain rooted in very limited visions of ethno-development, and it fails to address processes of coloniality, inequality that act as barriers for indigenous aspirations in terms of their territorial needs and their well-being. So those are my final considerations. I don't know if you guys, Dr. Binford, if they're opening for questions, but thanks for listening to this. Sorry for the typos and the mispronunciations, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you very much. We do have time for questions. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. I suppose just chime in, and if they get too many people doing it, I'll ask you to raise your hand. So anybody has a question, just jump right in. Fascinating, Alina. Thank you. Bob, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks, Aline. Yeah, quick question. I hear a lot of stories about the indigenous areas, and not ITs in particular, but places where the various tribal groups are. And so you've made a pretty strong case for a form of matriarchal social organization. And I'm just wondering how that can be reconciled with other observations people have been made. And I'm thinking about 10 years ago, I went up the Iriri and visited the Carrara, which is one of the Kayapo peoples. They're also Macroje. And it was the opposite. It was a perverse form of patriarchy. Essentially, the women were enslaved to the men. And I'm not an ethnographer, and I haven't had a chance to live with indigenous peoples. But I mean, is the variation that extreme, or are there just different stories out there? Or, I mean, what's your reaction to that? Have you seen the other form of perverse? I'll call it perverse patriarchy because that's what it was.
So first, I must say that there are a lot of performance. A lot of this encounter with the Warazu evolves through performatic actions. In fact, like when you're in the Awe, everything is about performance. There are always circular groups, dancing, chanting, kids, groups that are forming spontaneously, naturally within the space, and the sounds and the chanting. And then they added the praying as well because they start practicing Catholicism. Mm-hmm. But for the Awe specifically, women do not encounter the Warazu. Women do not talk in the city. When I conducted the surveys, one of the questions is like, do you want to move to the city? Because they're like, oh, city lights effect. Do you want to move to the city? It was like 99% said no. And the women, like their facial expressions, their body, their physical reactions to that was like, no. And a lot of women don't even speak Portuguese. And some of them who does, they're very shy. It took me much longer to engage with women. And there was a completely validation of my own family as a common source of like sharing the burden of being a woman. Once my family came in during my field work, because it was like too much to manage, so I just brought them in because but it was like a deep opening when that sense of shared burden came into place. And so what I see is that as the Warazu, we see the performance of the leaders. They only will come to talk if they have something to get in order to attend their own needs. Otherwise, they go to school. There are a lot of Awe people that went to undergraduate school. A lot of them have been training as health agencies. A lot of them are school teachers. But all the assets, everything that is produced, it's focused and returns to the village level. And so I think it's hard to say in terms of like the Carrara. I don't know them, but I've had interactions with the Kayapo. And the Kayapo women, they're pretty tough too. It's just like they're not necessarily going to perform politically within the Warazu lenses. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else with any questions?
I have a question. Aline, thank you for the presentation. That was great. I was wondering, has the perception of the territorial world, you think that, you're talking about multi-territorialization. I was really fascinating to learn about all the methods you use to learn about this, but I was wondering, has the perception of the territorial world and the multi-territorialization, has that changed over time? Is there an element of change that you kind of noticed just while doing your research, or even kind of looking at published literature on the subject? And I know territorialization has not been written about widely, but yeah, just wondering if there's an element of change.
It changes all the time. It's super dynamic. It changes in terms of age, So if this territorialization is happening to meet the needs of kids, it happens in one way. If it's in order to happen into addressing the needs of women, it happens in another way. If it's like a political articulation through the village level for like, oh, community agriculture practices, engagement with tools that will allow them to write projects, everything changes. The spaces they occupy is it's really based on the needs, and the needs, like in a community level, they vary a lot. Like when you talk to the women, they go to the city. I would say that 100% of the women goes to the city to go to the hospital. They're the ones who take their kids. They're the ones who take their moms and dads. They're the one who takes their husbands. They're the one who takes their sisters and brothers. They're the ones who are responsible for this. So when we look at the spatializing within the urban space, they're the ones. Women are in the hospitals. Men go to the federal police when there are things that must be resolved. They go to FUNAI, they go to articulate and mobilize politically in these spaces. So they're constantly changing. And through time, I believe it also has changed, especially because this specific community group, they've been through a lot. I mean, their whole territorial perception of home is not Danimipari, is Marawatsede. Marawatsede is still the homeland. And a lot of them talk about going back there. And so Marawatsede was returned to the Awe people in 2012. And the occupation of Marawatsede is the reoccupation of Marawatsede happens, and a lot of family members of them are already there, back in the motherland. And so that also affects this sense of where do you go? So they travel a lot to other villages. They travel a lot to other Awe territory. They have intermarriage within villages, within other Awe territory among those islands that I showed you, like all the 9. And so in terms of their ritualistic practices, another, again, it's very performatic. We don't know. I think we know not even like what we know about their mythology and their perception. They tell what they want to tell. And it was interesting because when they were the first Pacific encounter that I showed you, it only happened because the Awe wanted to. They said, we tamed the Warazu. This encounter is happening and nobody's being killed right now just because we want to. And they still recolonizing the city, and they're still territorializing the Warazu, and they're still see as taming the Warazu. And so this is always changing.
Okay, we've reached the 350 mark, and I think Mike Simonovich and I are willing to stick around for a little while if other people want to ask questions, but those of you who need to go to other things can leave now. Alina, I have
Thank you everybody for listening to me.
Yeah, I have a bit of a technical question, very simple one. You found people in the city. How did you find the individuals in the city? We're trying to do something like that in Cambodia. We can't, I'm having difficulties.
Yeah, but that's how, that kind of portrays how segregated urban spaces are in Brazil. And Brazil is like Cambodia is a soup, right? You can move one thing from the other. Brazil is a salad. You can separate very easily, you know? And so in the urban space, I wouldn't even have to. I mean, word of mouth. I would be like walking in the city. They would come to me. Oh, you're the one who's in this place working. What are you doing? Come to my house. Come visit. Come meet my family. You know, because we're like, oh, there is this Warazu person here. Oh, okay, there are opportunities, and so So they would approach me as well. And people from other village, I was asked in the village I worked at, I was like, do not talk to these people. And it was only during the surveys that I could see the other faces that were not present in the initial mobilizations of the work itself, because I was dealing with the man, I was dealing with the elder. And then it was only when I was invited within the RI that I could see faces. And people would come to me in the city and I'm like, okay, I know you, you're from there. And they're like, okay, don't talk to other villages, don't get. And so they did tame us, and they did tame, like, you're not allowed to talk to that group. And so it's, yeah.
That's not a method we're going to be able to use, I don't think. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, anybody else? Does everybody have a little thing on their window that says live on YouTube? You see that? In there, there's a place to capture the YouTube link if you look at the down arrow. So that way you'll be able to relive this if you wish. So, okay, so go ahead and do that. And other than that, I think we'll break up for the day. Next week, we have Anita Marshall from the Department of Geological Sciences, whose interests are in accessibility and equity in geosciences education. Something that surprises can be that the geology department is ahead of us on something like that. So anyway, so we'll see you all next week.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Good job.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.